Hi, welcome, and thank you for joining today's Facebook Live broadcast. I'm Linda Thrasibule, Senior Editor at Every. Your host today. Everyday Health is an online health publication, and we are proud to collaborate with the ISTH World Thrombosis Day campaign for today's broadcast. Today's Facebook Live covers an important topic that many of us can relate to: supporting a loved one with a new medical diagnosis. I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Gabriela Cesarman Maus from Mexico. Dr. Cesarman Maus is the head of the Cancer and Thrombosis Service at the National Cancer Institute in Mexico, and she is a World Thrombosis Day Steering Committee member. She sees many patients daily in her clinic and understands the emotional, mental, and physical challenges of a new medical diagnosis. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and hello to everyone from Mexico City.
I'd like to point out that while we plan on talking about thrombotic conditions today, such as deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary embolism, or a stroke, know that today's discussion can be applied to any newly diagnosed medical condition. And if you yourself have been recently diagnosed, we encourage you to save this broadcast and send the link to a friend, family member, or any loved one who will be supporting you in your journey. It will be recorded so you can come back and watch it at any time. This Facebook Live is an interactive discussion, so we highly encourage you to join the conversation with us in the comments. Introduce yourself, let us know where you're from, and make sure to ask questions throughout the broadcast. We will make sure to answer as many questions as we can. Okay, let's get started with a question that we receive a lot. Gabriela, when people are diagnosed with a new medical condition, in this case, a pulmonary embolism, the first question most patients or their loved ones ask is, now what? What are some of the first steps you recommend a patient take, and how can their caregiver or loved one support them after getting a diagnosis?
Thanks, Linda. That's an important question. But, people, when they have a clot, they actually have a ton of questions at the same time, right? Now what? But there's also a lot of questions other than that. So I think it really helps when you start by explaining exactly what happened. So why the shortness of breath, or why the dizziness or the chest pain, or why maybe a few days before they started having the shortness of breath, they had a swollen leg. No, so knowing what's going on with your body, it really helps. And then it also helps to know that you're not the only one, and that having a clot is actually pretty frequent, no? And either a clot in a vein or a clot in an artery, no? And since we are going to talk about pulmonary embolism, I think it's worth just explaining that this is a clot. So usually the blood is liquid, it's fluid, but sometimes it becomes a gel, right? And for the most part, it happens in the legs, in a vein in the legs. So that clots up the vein. And then in some people, that clot can just travel and go into the artery, one of the arteries of the lung. So that is a pulmonary embolism, right? So we can just call it a lung clot, no? And it is really important to know for the patients that it should be diagnosed. But once it's diagnosed, it's actually pretty easy to treat. And for the most part, when you figure out what the risk factors are, it's preventable. No, so preventing a second clot is going to be really important. No, so sometimes we as doctors think that some questions are important, but turns out that people have other questions. So here are like some of the questions. So one is, what is a clot? No, and then the other is, people want to know whether if you have a clot in the lung, so in an artery in the lung, does that mean that you can get a brain, no, a brain like a stroke? No, can the clot go from the lung to the head? And the answer is no. But then that is one of the most frequent initial questions. No, another question is, will it stay there forever? No, and the body has different mechanisms that dissolve the clot. So years after, you could do a CAT scan or an ultrasound, and you can find what was a clot, maybe like the what's left on the wall of the artery, but the clot does dissolve. No, so it is at the beginning when you have a clot, and in most people, this clot will either completely or partially dissolve, but then become something that's maybe a problem in the long run or not. No, we can talk about that later. Then one of the most important things that people want to know is, why did I get a clot? No, why me? No, what happened? What did I do? Is there something genetic going on, or is it something that I took, or is it a flight, or is it what happened? No, and that's also an important question. And I work at the National Cancer Institute in Mexico, and I have the cancer and thrombosis clinic. So most of my patients have cancer, and they're ongoing. They have ongoing treatment. And actually, their first question usually is, will having a clot and taking anticoagulants make me not be able to get my chemotherapy or my radiation therapy on time? Or what happens if I need surgery? No, and I'm having anticoagulants. No, so it really depends on who you are when you get the clot, and what you're doing in your life when you get a clot, and at what point of the disease you get the clot. That's the questions that you're going to ask. I also see patients with like antiphospholipid syndrome and lupus, and these are usually young women, and they really care much more about whether they're going to be able to get pregnant, no? And if they're pregnant, can they take an anticoagulant? So again, it's really personal, no? So the question is, now what? And the now what really depends on, again, no, it's absolutely personal. But there are things that you have to go over at the beginning, like once you start the treatment, and it will depend on how severe the clot was. And sometimes clots are completely asymptomatic, no? And sometimes they're like so bad that you end up in the ICU, or you can even die from a blood clot, no? So depending on the type of the clinical scenario, and then so that those are going to be the questions, and that's going to be the now what, no?
Mhm.
Mhm.
So another question, and this is from a patient perspective. What do you recommend if a patient does not have a loved one with them during the time of diagnosis? Do you have any tips for how they can ask someone to support them? And what information should they take note of during their visit?
Okay. Okay. So that also depends a lot on, I guess, what part of the world you're in and what your living situation is. And if you're in the hospital or if you're already at home, no? What we do a lot is we really try to have a loved one um, or a caregiver, someone that can be there, because it's always better for two people to listen to the same information. No, if we can't, we usually try to contact someone, and at the same time that we're seeing the patient, we go through Zoom or using any type of application, so we can actually talk to someone. No, there are some patients that don't want you to talk to anyone. No, they're very independent and they want to do everything by themselves. But most people really, really feel much better when when they have someone around. Um, so um, another option is, which works really well. We have patients that are amazing, and that they really want to help other patients. And having one of these patients talk to someone that just got a blood clot, especially when there's no one else around, that really helps. So actually, in the waiting room, sometimes you go and call a patient and they'll tell you to wait a little bit because they're talking to another patient, no, and they want to get information from them. So having other people that have gone through the same thing really also helps. And then, of course, if you have nursing or social workers or somebody, there's in hospitals, there's usually really competent people around and warm and caring, and sometimes if the patient doesn't have a family member, then any all of these people in the hospital can help out, no. But it is important to, once you get home and you're alone and then you don't remember exactly what the doctor said, it's a good idea to to have someone that has the same information. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I agree. I also, it's the other question too is patients who have to, it's some patients may speak a different language.
Right.
And so the question is, should they bring a translator, and how can they manage that if there's a language barrier?
Can I tell you an anecdote?
Of course.
Okay. Okay. So when I was a fellow, I was in New York, and I had a patient that was from China, and we were giving him chemotherapy. So every time, he really didn't know English, and my English wasn't that good at that time. So I kept on, when I would go into his room to see how he was feeling, I kept on asking him if he had like nausea and like belly pain, or would headache or dizziness, and um, and then I finally got a colleague of mine who was Chinese and that knew Mandarin. So he asked him how he was doing. And the patient said that he was feeling like really great, but he was worried about me because every time I would go in to see him, I was feeling lousy. No, I had nausea. I was no. So of course we weren't understanding each other. No. And sometimes, even if it's the same language, you may miss the point. No. So yes, there should always be some way of translating, no? And when you finish giving the information, or during the information, during while you're talking to the person that got the clot, or the caregiver, it's really important at the end to have them tell you what they understood, no? But yes, in Mexico we have around 60 different languages, no? So people come and they talk tzotzil or tzeltal, or just different languages that are not on apps, no? So it's not easy just to go to the app and try to translate, no? But yeah, communication is important. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. We have actually, we have here one of the comments we've gotten from our viewers. I believe it's from Steve, who a loved one shared a tip for how he cared for his wife. Okay, so Steve says, give survivors time to recover without judgments, be supportive, and keep talking.
Of course.
That actually brings up the other issue is about mental health. And, in other broadcasts, we've taken a closer look at the emotional aspect of a blood clot diagnosis. So how can a person support a loved one's mental well-being when they've been recently diagnosed?
Yeah, well, Linda, I guess you have so much more experience, no? Having been so many years in the science field, and listening to patients, and so one of the things I do, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but everybody responds in a completely different way to everything in life, not only to diseases, no? So it's again personal. It's you try to be there, to talk to, you try to make sure that the person that's taking care of your patient has the information, is in control of the information, which makes you feel makes the patient feel much better. But there's always the option of going to have specialized care. No, there are some studies that show that like 50% of people that have had a blood clot live with stress, throughout their lives. PTSD maybe in 1% of patients. No, so it can be like really severe, or it can be. I also have patients who've had blood clots that are not that severe, that don't really care, which is interesting. No, I mean, they care that they had it, but they're not worried. And that really depends on the personality that everybody has. There, one interesting thing is that you can go into like the ISTH website or the CDC, and there are a lot of clot stories, personal stories, and on how they each one of them managed their their diagnoses. But I would love to listen to people that are that are listening right now. I would love to see what they think, how they managed it, how if actually, I think if they're here, it means that it's something that still is really important to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I ask the viewers to please submit any questions you have. This is your opportunity to get some answers from someone who specializes in this area, and also can provide insight or tips or anything that you've always wanted to ask your doctor but forgot or didn't have the time to do. So, but let's see what else.
I have another anecdote, if I can tell it. It's just because
Absolutely.
it's because like one of the questions is what do the people, the patients or the caregivers or the loved ones know, what do they usually ask during an appointment? Sorry, this is my phone. Okay, so what do they ask? And it varies so much. And I have this story, which I think is incredible, which is I have a friend that has, she has cancer, and her husband are an amazing couple, and they have kids. And so they just, they had to tell the kids that she had cancer. So they sit the kids down, and they tell them, look, we have something like really, really important to tell you, something really serious. And And then my friend says, look, I have to tell you that I have cancer. And the youngest child says, oh, thank God. No, I thought you were going to tell us that you were going to get divorced. No. So yeah. So I mean, you always expect that someone's going to react or to want to know something or to think about something in a way, and it depends so much on like where you are in life, no, and who, um like what's important to you at that moment, no. So what I'm going at is that people have different worries. So the questions, sometimes we as doctors just answer things without knowing really what the questions are. So it's what are the questions? And sometimes the questions will surprise us, no? Because at the end, a patient, a patient is a patient, but it's many other things besides being a patient, no? And what should caregivers do? Sometimes the caregiver is the patient, no? So when the caregiver is the mom, no, when the mom is the one that's taking care of the kids and sending them to school, and no, or the father, or that, no, it's you really have to figure out what's going on in the patient's life to decide what tips to give, no?
Yeah, absolutely. We do have one question. You may have covered this, but maybe this is a different way of looking at it. So the question is, what are some practical tips to best support our loved ones that are patients? And so when I think of practical tips, I mean, it could be something about like how to prepare for, maybe it's what do you do before the doctor visit? Or just things like that I think some people don't think about that until after, it's usually also like after the doctor visit, it's like, oh, why didn't I ask this question? Or
Mhm.
um yeah, just your
Right.
thoughts.
Yeah, so you should, right. So you should really know what medicine you're taking, if there are any drug interactions, any drugs that you shouldn't be taking, no? How many times a day you're going to take it? Should this be taken with meals? No, because once you get home, then you don't remember, no, if you had to take it or not. Um, what's the duration of treatment? No, am I going to have to take it for a month or for many months? Um, it really helps, the caregiver to know what to do. The other thing is there anything that I can do to manage the shortness of breath or the pain in the leg? Can I get some rehab? Can I do exercise? I mean, knowing all that helps the caregiver to help out, throughout the process. Uh, Mostly initially, which is when you need more help. No, then other questions are, what happens when I take an anticoagulant? Is there a risk? And then really going in detail on what are the signs of bleeding. So anticoagulants do decrease. So they make you not clot really well. So for example, if you cut yourself, you're going to bleed a little bit more, right? So the patient should know, and the caregiver should know that yes, you can bleed more. So you should, just put a little bit of compress for a little bit longer time. They should know what happens if they're going to go to the dentist, no? And they're going to have a tooth pulled out, or they should know that, what are the signs of like internal bleeding? Most people think that, if you have black stools, especially if they smell like really bad, this can be bleeding. And most people don't know it because you look at the stools and they look black, they don't look red, no? So they really should know that this can be, a sign of bleeding from the stomach, and that, they should know not only that, blood in the urine or blood in the stool means that you have to stop the medicine, and means that you have to go back to the hospital. sometimes hospitals are really far away. So yes, the caregiver should know what the contact numbers are, who to call, when to really go to the hospital, even if you're far away. Um, so yeah, basically what to do with the medicine and what to do with the possible, bad side effects from the medicine, which is basically bleeding. No.
Agreed. The next question we have is just a really interesting one is, what do you do if your loved one is diagnosed with a medical condition but doesn't want help or support? How do you approach that?
Oi. Okay. So I'm not the best person to say it. What would you do? It's the thing is that it's really it's what is a person going through? Why don't they want to know? What are they? Why are they scared? Some people actually don't want to know what they have, but they do want to know how to get treated. No. Are you talking about? I mean, a really severe. Are you talking about like a very advanced cancer, or are you just talking about something very simple? No. Um, it's really tough. I can't answer that question. Just
Yeah, for me, I think about on a personal level. I have an aunt who was very stubborn when it came to she had she had high blood pressure. She had a couple of conditions, nothing that was severe, but
mhm,
something that's worth treating and taking care of and managing. And a lot of times, we had to. It basically it came down to, we love you, we
of
want you to
course.
get better. Don't you want to get better?
Mhm,
And it took some coaxing, but we would eventually she would and we kept going at it. We were consistent about it. It wasn't like a one conversation and done. It was something we kept bringing up until
yeah.
she finally went, because she realized.
Yeah, sometimes you're just scared, or you're depressed, or you're so trying to, yeah, just be there. No, being there and insisting. Yeah.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, Another question we have is, do you see any cultural differences in caregiving? For example, have you noticed any differences in how loved ones support a patient in Mexico versus a caregiver in the US?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's actually I work at a public hospital, which is the National Cancer Institute, and then I work at a private hospital, and it's absolutely different. And it's um, you rarely see. So we see like really thousands of patients. Like the National Cancer Institute, people come in from everywhere in Mexico. No, they sometimes they travel 16 hours by bus to get to the institute. Um, you rarely see someone crying, and it's everybody has cancer. No. um, and then many people have other things on top of cancer, and usually people don't, they're not crying. um, they usually have, I mean, they always have a family member, um, and and they usually live with a lot of people. So the grandmother lives with the kids and with the grandchildren, and no, so there's always like a lot of people around, most of the time, not always. But and then you go to the private hospital, and every day there's people crying on the no, in the hallway. um, the way you take the disease, the way you think about the what you have, has to do a lot with how you take life in general. No. um, and then caregiving. So in private hospitals, you also have families, but you have many more people that are like more independent and that live by themselves and that are, and that are used to being able to solve things with, solve anything in life, they're usually able to solve it. And when they're not, it's really, it's really chaotic. So it is interesting. And then the difference from the United States, I don't know. I think people in Mexico have much more support. So there's much more family. We usually don't, I actually live in a building where my mom lives in the penthouse and my sister in second floor, and I know. So we usually don't leave our families. Maybe we go study somewhere, come back, but we live in the same place where our family is. And I think in the United States, everybody, you're like, go to college and then, or don't go to college, but usually go and live somewhere else, like far away from your parents, or so it is different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we also have another response. Let's see, by being patient with the recovery journey. Hold on a second.
What do people think? What have people gone through?
So here's one response that I guess a caregiver helped me clean my house, looked after my kids, got my groceries. Everyday stuff was so helpful.
That was through like Medicare, or
no.
how do you do it in the States? Mm-hmm.
They're sharing what caregivers have done for them.
Okay.
So it could be family, it could be friends. Another response, being a patient, by being patient with the recovery journey, which can be painfully slow. The journey has some psychosocial impact marred with anxiety and some empathy.
Sure.
And it goes a long way. Yeah, these are just some of the responses we're getting. Having someone to help with the household chores or just being there for everyday things is really helpful. Yeah, I think it's, I think everybody's just talking about like who's helped them, and, so lucky that we've gotten, some of us have that help.
Right.
Here's one question. What's something people don't think of when supporting a loved one?
Do they have the answer?
No, I think they're asking the question.
I guess it has to do with empathy. So if they have someone that's very empathic, they'll think about it, no? What's something they don't think of? Maybe sometimes, when your leg is like really swollen, it's really obvious, no? So that makes people, see that you're having, no? That you're distressed, no? But sometimes when you only have a pulmonary embolism and you can't see anything from the outside, it's hard for people to see that you're actually, that you are suffering, no? That there's something going on, that you're short of breath, or that, no? And then it's also hard to see whether you're sad, no? So I don't know. I guess it depends on the caregiver and on the patient and on being able to say what you're feeling, no? The communication between caregiver and patient.
So as a caregiver, what are some questions that I should ask the patient? Like what should let's say they're feeling discomfort that day, and or anything you try, they're not comfortable, or they're cranky, or they're not feeling great. What kind of questions should I be asking them to alleviate that stress or anxiety associated with the condition?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it depends on the situation. So anything from yes, giving medication for pain, or, putting their legs up if they're very, if you have a lot of edema, putting the leg up can, help. Um, just bringing them, just pampering them, just bringing some tea, or just watching a movie, or just doing something, um, taking them out on a stroller if they can't walk, taking them out in a wheelchair, and just going to trying to get them to go back into their normal life. How you do that, it depends on human communication. What do you ask them? It depends. There are children that have blood clots. How do you treat them? What do you ask them? What do they need? So maybe you should just being there, and then once in a while asking if they need something, or just bringing something nice. Sometimes just not talking about the clots, sometimes talking about the clots, but sometimes just talking about other important things in life.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't had a clot. A lot of some of my friends, actually, if you go to the International Society of Thrombosis and Hemostasis website, and you go into my clot story, you can see, for example, the story of Sueli Resende. She's an amazing Brazilian doctor who had a clot, who actually got off the plane. She was going to give a lecture on blood clots because she is a specialist she's like the head of hematology at a very important hospital. And she just fainted 50 meters after, getting off the plane. And you can hear her story. And just going in, maybe, when you're feeling lousy, or going in and listening to these my clot stories, how they managed it, how they feel, what they do to try to avoid a new one. That I think that may also make you feel better when you're like right in the middle of of being stressed out about a clot.
Mm.
Mm.
Another question. What is the general recovery time for CVST, which is cerebral venous sinus thrombosis?
It really varies depending on the size of the clot, and why you got the clot. CVST, we see it mostly in young women who take oral contraceptives, but that's not the only reason. We see it also in some patients with like lupus or other autoimmune diseases. But at my hospital, we see it mostly in patients that have acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And so there's this drug that really helps. It helps like cure leukemia, which is L-asparginase. But because of different things that happen to the proteins in the body, it really increases your risk of blood clots. And 50% of those blood clots are in the veins that are like right under the bone. So we're not talking about veins or clots that are inside the brain, but actually over the brain, between the brain and the bones. It can be really really give you a bad headache. And how long it takes you to get better once you start the anticoagulants really depends on the size of the clot. So that's, I think, like specific things like that should be discussed. Probably the person that asked the question has or knows someone that has it. So it's really important to ask your doctor your specific what's going on with you specifically. No. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Next question. Many people who have had a blood clot need to take their recovery slowly,
Right.
including physical exercise. So what do you recommend in terms of slowing, in terms of like building up your workout again?
Okay, so it really varies. Some people have a very small blood clot, and want to start working out like right away. I have a friend, a doctor, an ID doctor who's like amazing, and she runs every day. And a week after her clot, she wanted to start running. No, um, so it's maybe not a good idea. For the first month, the clot is a little bit labile, so it's easy. It's the first month the clot can travel into the lungs. Once you start your anticoagulation, um, that's less and less likely. But at the first month, what we usually say is that you shouldn't be doing, a lot of, hard exercise. Um, but after a month, then depending on what your baseline is, no, and what you like to do in terms of exercise, then you can start exercising and doing like more, running if that's what you like. But then there's some people that have really bad swollen legs, and that'll take up to like a few months even to get better. And so what we do is we have a rehabilitation clinic. So we send the patients there, and they'll start getting slowly exercises, and then after a month, then they'll start getting we call them wraps. No, so when you have sometimes the edema, the leg can be so swollen that you really need some help in getting the leg down to its normal size or near normal size. So exercise depends. Getting into exercise really depends on how bad the thrombosis was. Sometimes you don't have a problem with the legs, but you have a really bad pulmonary embolism, and you're short of breath, and that shortness of breath can last a long time. You can have post-thrombotic syndrome, which means that you can have, very bad or not bad, depending on the severity, but you can have problems with, the color of your leg, or you can still feel that the leg is very, very heavy. Or you can have problems with shortness of breath, and really, so it depends on the type of thrombus, and really you should be talking to your doctor and asking him if or her if you should be getting respiratory therapy, or if you should be getting another type of physical therapy. No. So again, as in everything, everything's personal. No, everyone's different.
Right. Absolutely. I think this is going to be our last question. What resources are available for caregivers to prevent burnout when the patient has no financial means to hire a relief person, and the caregiver is alone in providing assistance to the patient?
Resources meaning, because the resources go anything from really good information, which is you can get it from ISTH, from Thrombosis Canada, from UK Thrombosis. There's so online there are a lot of resources. No, if you go into World Thrombosis Day, there's tons of resources for doctors and for patients too. No. So, and then you have all these websites that are made by patient advocates. There's actually a really good one, which is called Blood Clot Recovery Network. And it's really simple to navigate, and you can, get a lot of questions and answers from those sites, and you can get in touch with other people. But that's more information. But then what do you do about insurance, or what do you do if you live 3 hours away from the hospital, or what do you do? There's so many issues around, getting sick with a blood clot or with anything else. No, what do you do when you don't have someone to help out? I guess it depends on the country. Some people have, when I was in the States, I could get a lot of things for my patients with Medicare. and Medicaid. Sometimes I could get people to, caregivers to go and help out and, have everything for free, in countries where you can actually, it may sound bad, but you can actually hire like a nanny to take care of you for a month, no? It's like, you become family, no, with that person. Someone needs a job, and then you need someone to take care of you. And there are many, I think there are more resources sometimes in poorer countries, no? But yeah, I think that would be it.
Okay, great. Well, these were, thank you so much for these amazing answers. And so we are going to close our, today's session. Before we close out, we'd like to share a few resources we have available at Everyday Health that I think may be helpful for our viewers, and we'll include links to them in the comments section. So again, thank you so much, Gabriela, for joining us today and for sharing your perspective. And a heartfelt thank you to our participants today for sharing your personal experiences. Whether you're a patient yourself or supporting a loved one, remember that you're not alone in the journey. And also, please visit worldthrombosisday.org for more information and to get involved in the campaign. And then also save the date for World Thrombosis Day's next Twitter chat on October 13th. Again, thank you for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Linda. I'm a big fan of yours and of Amy's, and you have an amazing program. Thank you so much.
Thank you.